Okay, let's bring in Rahim Allani, Managing Director of OCI Groups here in Toronto. Just watching a couple of little stocks this morning, small caps moving around. Rahim's here to discuss, first of all, good to see you, by the way.
Likewise.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Let's talk energy, because it's been an amazing month or two for oil markets specifically. Again, we'll throw out a bunch of names here, guys. Some primary listing here in Toronto and Canada, but some of these are going to be dual listed, either OTC or wherever in the U.S. So I want to talk about oil because obviously a huge chunk of the Canadian economy going to be energy based.
Right.
A lot of interesting names to start the year off here in Toronto, specifically on the energy side.
Yeah, when you look back on the past year, energy's had a volatile year, and I think it's looking like it's going to settle back in at a range that is acceptable and actually great for Canadian companies. Now, a couple of things just from the macro level you're going to have to think about. Just the tightening of the market. I know it's a small thing, but the weather that we've had, some cold weather here in Canada, how that's going to affect supply. And potentially, if there's another lockdown, how that affects demand. So you might want to just do your homework on where you see demand going. And then OPEC just decides, of course, what they want to do, and they adjust accordingly. So you got to just take all of that into account. And then how that comes down into Canadian companies is where that demand goes, where the pricing goes, and if it sticks around at this $80, $90 mark where it is right now, we're getting back to 52-week highs on oil. If it gets back into that consistent range, plus a Canadian dollar that hasn't gone too far out of bounds with respect to inflation, then you get really good dollar flows that are coming into these Canadian companies. And what do they do with that money then? Do they start to pay down debts on these big bets that they took a year and a half, 2 years ago? Or do they go back into share buybacks and dividends? So it's a good time to potentially look at some Canadian names.
Yeah, I was reading a couple of things over the past couple of weeks. I mentioned yesterday, I forget what the article was, but it was about 2 weeks ago. I was reading somebody was projecting $150 to $175 oil by the end of the year, which is monstrous. Obviously, also I think it was multi-month highs on natural gas yesterday on this cold weather that we've been having on the East Coast as well. So even on that sense, it's a good opportunity.
Yeah, because a couple of the Canadian names will skew a little bit heavier towards gas, and with gas having these higher prices, and again, just adding more cash flow and adding top line into some of these oil and gas producers for sure.
Yeah, let's jump into a few. New Vista, tell us about New Vista.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the chart alone, I think we might have talked about New Vista a year ago as a name. It's a great little story. Their assets are in a Pipestone and the Montney asset area. They just announced their Q4, so they were 57,000 BOE per day. 55% of it which was nat gas at higher prices that we just talked about. So it's a great looking chart. For 2022, they're looking at spending about $500 million and looking to generate free cash flow of $315 million against $49 million previously. And they only have about $545 million of debt remaining, which is a big number. But again, if you're just going to spit out free cash flow of $300 million this year, potentially you can bring that debt way down.
Yeah, just looking at a daily chart here, guys. Obviously, a smaller price stock here. We're used to seeing the XOMs and the bigger one, CVX in the U.S. going to be much more expensive. $7 stock here, $8 stock. Nice breakout yesterday. Technically, it looks pretty good, as does oil. Baytex was the next.
Yeah, again, that's a very strong Western Canadian name, as well as some assets in the U.S. 80% crude. And after Q3, they just announced again $284 million of free cash flow, net income of just over $1 billion, compared to a loss of $2.6 billion a year ago. So you lose $2.6 billion, you make up with $1 billion the following year. The board has also approved $400 million of a CapEx budget. So these guys are spending money in the ground and looking to generate free cash flow for the next year. And again, where does that go? Does that go toward debt? Does that go towards other in situ assets? So there's a lot of scope to go with oil prices and gas prices where they are for these guys.
Yeah, was there one more on the energy side before?
Cardinal's one that we've talked about a few times. CJ is the ticker.
Yeah.
Western Canada, it's had a great 2021. It's getting back up near $5, and with $80 oil, again, they're going to expect 150, 200 million free cash flow in the year. When you take those numbers into account, if you view oil being where it's going to stay, and these guys being able to supply at the levels that they're at, just generating this type of free cash flow, just take a thesis on where you want to be. And if you believe that it's going to continue to go, then you've got debt repayments and you've got dividends looking at.
So more to come as far as the energy space is concerned this year for sure. I want to switch gears here a little bit, talk a little bit about DeFi in general, but also we're going to have a conversation tomorrow with a guest coming on about GameFi specifically, which is supposed to be hot. We hear so much about NFTs. That continues to grow exponentially year over year. Tell us about a few opportunities in the DeFi space.
Yeah, I think the DeFi space is obviously it's growing exponentially. I was listening to an interview yesterday, and the guy was just saying his analysis was you miss a week, you miss a year in this type of business just because things are going and growing so quickly. And I obviously watch in here, so you guys have had a few guys come on, talking about the DeFi space and different opportunities there. Again, it's just growing exponentially. The NFT space is massive. The Ethereum space, and again, where you want to be on Ethereum, Solana, where you want to be on the DeFi space. There's also the Bitcoin space. I just heard Sean talking a little bit about Hut 8. So there's a lot of names. Depending on which way you want to go as an aggregate, do you want to invest into a stock that covers a plethora of coins and currencies? That's one way to play it. I'm not a big crypto person myself, so I won't get into that. Yeah. You guys probably have smarter people than me on that. But on the equity side, I can speak to those a little bit and some of the opportunities there. Yeah,
let's go to WonderFi here. Obviously, a well-known name. We've talked about it many times on the show, but a nice-looking chart as well for WonderFi.
Yeah, WonderFi, it's been a good-looking chart. Obviously, you guys have had Mr. O'Leary on here a few times to talk about it, and Kevin's a big proponent of the company, obviously, and I've watched his interviews, and he just came on the other day to talk about the acquisition. I think it's a good-looking acquisition, and I think, much like some of the other spaces out there, whether it's a cannabis name or whether it's a mushroom name or whether it's a mining name, there's going to be some level of consolidation that's going to start to happen here. And guys with good performing stocks and cash in the bank are going to be able to make deals like WonderFi just did with BitBuy, because they're going to be able to add in their liquid piece of paper. They're going to be able to add in their cash and make, whether it's a BitBuy of the world that's a private co, and get them liquid. That could be a great opportunity for some of these privates and publics to take advantage of that opportunity.
It was interesting to see on that inflation number, though. This thing came down a bit, and then yesterday, huge day back to the upside. So good look for WonderFi. We'll move on to Smart, SMRT.
Yeah, just touching back on that inflation point, I think people are talking about how inflation gets, because the U.S. numbers are going a little crazy on the inflation side. So some of these proxies, whether it's gold, whether it's cash, and now whether it's crypto, how that all sort of correlates to where inflation's going. So that is a really good point to keep an eye out for the active traders out there. Smart's another one I think you had on a couple of weeks ago. Canadian company here. They're, from a revenue point of view, they're doing 1.6, 1.8 million monthly. They're creeping up to about 2 million a month in revenue. Very small cap company on relative terms from some of the guys that you're talking about. But they just got status as a marketplace by all Canadian securities regulators, which is a huge step. So guys like me, you, and everybody else can go in and create these accounts and start actively trading crypto. And if you're doing 2 million a month in revenue, they should be gearing towards 25, 30 million for the year, which is, again, a big number for a small cap Canadian company. So, and on that business, the margins are pretty decent. You don't have a huge burn on that type of a company. So it's something to keep an eye out for as they gear towards profitability.
Yeah, a decent opportunity on that news. Just a couple days ago, we got down to 60 cents, I guess it was. But we had them on the show I was just after, I think, the IPO, a couple of days after, but just hovering around that 80-cent mark. Quickly here, we'll move on to Hut 8. Wanted to mention Hut. You can trade it both sides of the border, Toronto, and a NASDAQ listing as well.
Right. I think we just brought that up because Sean mentioned it, so we want to make sure Sean looks smart on his call there. So they racked up over 5,000 Bitcoin. They're mining about 8.8 Bitcoin a day. They have that 2,800 for the year. They just racked up 30 million in equipment financing, and that's a big spend for these guys, right? Is obviously where they're getting the money for the equipment. They also added in, they want to be environmentally conscious, like a lot of these guys now want to be, because they are, energy users. So how these guys get to that level, that's going to be interesting to see how they tap into that ESG narrative. But when you have the equipment and you're racking up 8.8 Bitcoin a day, it's a pretty good number.
Yeah, this is a mining company, so this is a pure Bitcoin play.
It was something we want to talk about just outside of the DeFi space, because you got to bifurcate sort of the crypto Bitcoin play versus the DeFi plays.
Yeah, and it's going to follow the price of Bitcoin pretty closely here as well, up and down. So thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
Rahim Allani, Managing Director of OCI Groups here in Toronto. Good luck, guys, at some DeFi opportunities possibly this year.